Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Acting Deputy President. I too rise to speak on this NDIS report. The areas I want to focus on is the coalition comments, and particularly in relation to financial sustainability and transparency of the scheme. Now, financial sustainability and transparency lie at the heart of the future success of this world-first and incredibly life-transforming scheme. And when in government, as the minister, I significantly increased the amount and regularity of NDIS data that was released publicly. Now, sadly, this transparency has been progressively eroded by the Albanese government to the point where current actuarial data is no longer available on the future projections of the scheme beyond the next 3 years. And there is a very clear reason for that, which I'll come to shortly. But the government has made $74 billion worth of cuts to the NDIS program over the next 10 years. And they have now hidden any of the data publicly where participants, senators and the Australian public can actually find out exactly where those cuts are coming from. But to put it in context, this scheme in 2019 was $10 billion, just under $10.5 billion. What the last quarterly report, which thankfully was released, albeit very late, by the government, it's now demonstrated that the scheme is almost that in the first quarter of this year alone. So those $74 billion cuts apparently are going to come from a framework and initiatives that have yet to be implemented and a framework that does not yet exist. And it is no wonder they are not revealing the data. But again, to put the scheme in context, the last publicly available NDIA actuarial forecasts predicted the scheme will have more than 1 million participants by 2032 and cost Australian taxpayers close to $100 billion annually. Now, this quantum of growth is not reflected in the latest federal Labor government's budget, hence why they haven't released this year's actuarial forecasts. So the government continues to refuse to provide the detail on where these cuts are coming from. Instead, they're claiming, as I've said, a yet-to-be-developed financial framework will magically make $74 billion worth of savings without cutting either of the two drivers of the scheme, which for any insurance scheme are the number of participants and the average cost per participants. So why is this important in relation to this report? Because coalition members absolutely understand that no matter how good the recommendations in this report might be, if you cannot fund them and you cannot even fund the scheme, then no matter what recommendations this place makes, they're pointless because they cannot be funded. So let's have a look at what we have gleaned from the reports that they have made available. So the quarterly report, which has just been released, has 5 key figures which combined demonstrate that this government cannot deliver those $74 billion worth of savings over the next 10 years without slashing participant numbers and slashing participant packages. And they very cunningly hid that data till after the next election, but I can guarantee you they will not get away with a $74 billion fraud on Australians with serious and permanent disabilities. So the quarterly report says this: total NDIS expenses for the 3 months to September this year were $10.1 billion, 1% higher than the estimates in just June of this year. Now, the second point is that in September, the last quarter, total plan inflation just for a single quarter was 5.5%, which annualised is well over 15%. Now, remember that 15% because the government is trying to tell us they're trying to cut the annual increase down to 8%, when it's gone up in one quarter from 12% to over 15%. somehow, without cutting participant plans and cutting participant numbers, they're magically going to reverse that trend. So the third piece of interesting data is that participant numbers themselves are still increasing significantly, and by 3% in the last quarter alone. So over 21,000 new participants joined the scheme. And this quarterly increase is the equivalent to an annual increase of 15% to the scheme. So these numbers are still trending upwards when the government is telling us that these mythical and magical, yet-to-be-identified measures are magically going to drop the scheme's growth. The fourth bit of interesting data that they have tried to hide, but they cannot, the average payment per participant during the last quarter was $63,600 per annum, or 1.3% higher than the projections from the last budget alone. So again, participant numbers, average plan costs and the total budget amount are all still trending upwards. And significantly, there was no reduction in the average plan budgets of participants who were continuing in the scheme. In fact, it was still trending upwards. So you've got a scheme that is still exploding in numbers. You've got an insurance scheme that the two drivers of cost, participants and average cost participants, are not and cannot be controlled by the federal government on behalf of the taxpayers. So that is why every quarter and every budget since 2019, they have been going up. So no matter what this place reports in committees, no matter what the review that Bill Shorten is hiding from this place and people with disabilities, the independent review that's taken a long period of time, that he has, the states have, but he's not releasing to us. So unless that makes the structural changes, that means that this government of the day or the board can control both drivers of cost, this scheme is not sustainable. But yet, this government, instead of actually offering a hand of bipartisanship, which we did to the government, which I did as minister over 2 years ago, and said, let's work together to fix this, to put it on a sustainable trajectory so they can live within the budget the taxpayers give them. But yet, they are hiding actuarial data. They are still putting out this completely false and cruel narrative to people with serious and permanent disability that somehow, while the scheme is going up in costs, they can cut $74 billion over the next 10 years from this scheme without cutting plans and participant numbers. It is probably the cruelest financial hoax, the cruelest that any government has done in my living memory. And certainly on this side, we will not let you get away with that. But I just want to finish and highlight, while they suppressed the annual financial sustainability report, which is the actuarial data, 239 pages it has been previously, with probably well over 100 tables. In their 4-page actuarial report, they had the government actuary's report for their annual report. And the government actuary could not have been any more damning. They didn't even give the government actuary the full actuarial data, the projections over 10 years. He got the executive summary of the report and some draft Excel spreadsheets from this minister and this agency. And he has clearly said he does not believe the numbers from the NDIS. He said he considers this risk is to be greater in the middle term, which is exactly when the data that those opposite the government is now hiding from us, because remember, they've gone from giving us 10 years actuarial forward data to 3. Guess what? That gets them through the next budget. So they can still maintain this fiction that they are not cutting the scheme by $74 billion. And in fact, with the scheme still rising greater than was forecast, They were trying to get it down to 8%, and in the last quarter it's gone from 12 to 15%. So not only will it have to be $74 billion, they're going to have to rip out even more than that to bring it down to the 8%.